describing, to support employment uses across the town, and the provision of a business park use was identified as one of those aspirations the council can seek to achieve, and the proposal you have in front of you enable that to be delivered as part of the eastern neighbourhood here, the larger neighbourhood here. So again, that's a part of that element of the scheme going forward. Chairman, I think those are probably the most significant points. It may be useful just to touch on, of course, I think we also heard earlier about the potential for the construction employment scheme, a scheme to draw in local employment and provide apprenticeships or a construction programme on the site. I think those are probably the most salient points in respect of neighbourhood centres and employment.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. The point I'd like to raise, or ask a question at least, 8.3.4 on page 81 talks about shops, cafes, pubs, etc. I was a little surprised that Class A2, financial class, professional class, was going to be excluded, so there couldn't be a bank or a building society. Communities do need those type of institutions. The community needs a bank, for example. It would make the community a bit more self-contained. Could there be a bit more justification why that has been deliberately excluded? Thank you.
They're not excluded, but they would need to have a planning permission to be applied for, so that you could actually judge whether or not the use was appropriate. Now, if all of those ground floor units were given over to those sorts of uses, it would be a rather lopsided kind of neighbourhood centre. So the idea is to try and get a good balance of uses, to make sure that retail, cafe uses and so on would go in there, but not necessarily exclude a bank or building society if that's appropriate.
Councillor Simons.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Talking about youth provision, I know this is not sort of the youth bit, but we're talking about community centres, and that very much houses things like Scouts Club, Beavers, Brownies, Guides, karate, all the things that the young people do. Now my worry is that already we have a waiting list for our Scouts, our Cubs and our Beavers. Some of them for the Brownies, the Rainbows, but not so much the Guides. So where are these children going to go? Because these community centres aren't going to be built straight away. So where are these young people going to go in the meantime? Because we can't take them in our existing centres because they all have waiting lists.
Thank you, good point.
One of the proposed Section 106 requirements, I forget which one offhand, does require the submission of a community buildings strategy. That is number 9, thanks to Kevin. The idea is that we look at the detail of those community centres. There could be 2 within the site, 2 major centres, for which there's provision of £2 million in funding in the Section 106, and work with the community in order to understand how best they should be provided, in order to cater for as wide a range of needs as possible. It may not be possible to cater for absolutely everybody, but if the buildings are designed in a way that's flexible, they have good use of space, perhaps an outside space that can be used by just those sorts of groups, then we'd be going some way to satisfy a need.
If I come back, I think what Councillor Simon Hamilton requested is when are they going to be built?
The development's in 2 phases, and we would certainly be looking through that community building strategy to provide one of those centres in the first phase. And indeed, as you'll be aware from the report, there's a proposal to set up a community trust, which would, we expect, operate from the very early days of the development and which would be very much involved in making that kind of provision, involved in the design. It would need that kind of accommodation itself in order to operate satisfactorily. So it would be an early provision on the first phase.
Thank you, Councillor Simons. Do you want to go?
That hasn't actually answered my question. How would you feel if you moved into a new neighbourhood and you wanted your son to go to the Scouts or your daughter to go to the Brownies? We've got 5-bedroomed houses coming here, so there's bound to be children. Sorry, we haven't got room. Sorry, we haven't got room. Sorry, we haven't got room. That's what I mean. And it could take a year for the first community centre to be built. What are those children going to do in the meantime when we have long waiting lists already for our activities for young people?
Chair, again, really it's back to this, it's a basic infrastructure question, isn't it, that Councillor Simon is raising there about the, it could be community uses, it could be retail, it could be the roads, it could be any issue, and then of course in their debate earlier we're very much saying, well, we want all the infrastructure up front, please, before we want to deliver the housing. Chairman, we have to be realistic. The world unfortunately just does not operate in that way, and the decisions that are made by funders of infrastructure will not recognise that scenario. We do have to work on the basis that we're seeking to deliver from this scheme a very significant amount of infrastructure, and again, the figures have been quoted, a very significant amount of infrastructure, but we cannot promise it will be delivered on day one. It just simply is not a tenable way to bring forward new development of this scale. We are seeking to ensure through the legal agreement arrangements that we have the control to ensure that infrastructure is brought forward. But I think we do have to have a reasonable view of how we can deliver this. And I do understand the point about lack of capacity in certain areas and provision that we would all like to see delivered up front. But we have to recognise that the funding to deliver a lot of this infrastructure would be released from the value of the site, and the value of the site just cannot be released immediately at the first point it comes forward, Chair. So we do acknowledge the point. We think we have a reasonable set of safeguards in place, but I don't think we can meet the aspirations to have everything delivered up front with the development, Chair.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the use, if I may, I look at page 130. It's not contributions and also non-highway implications, and I look at allotment provision, 150,000. Road museums to support their work possibly on site, 75,000. Football ground, £1 million. Off-site sport, 3 million, all very commendable. I see nothing about early years provision. Youth services, a fairly small figure, I would suggest 50,000. Could I ask how that figure was arrived at?
Chair, we're just going to identify the location in the report where it refers to it. What I can tell members is that is not does not meet the total provision, the total funding that the County Council would seek to achieve through its normal toolkit approach. And that's the first time we mentioned that tonight, Chair. The members will be aware that the County Council has in place a document that seeks to identify funding provision for its service areas based on housing units and mix and so on. This is an outline application, so there is some degree of uncertainty, of course, that the final mix will come forward, but based on the County Council's toolkit, the funding sought is certainly greater than that £50,000. Chairman, we will again have had to apply a priority approach to how we feel funding should be distributed towards the various service areas. And Chairman, this is one where members may have a view. We've set out the funding approach we feel is reasonable given the significance of the service areas that have been raised through consultation with us by the service providers and by members of the public, and we feel that the arrangements we've set out in the funding table are a reasonable approach. Chairman, if members feel that's an unacceptable approach, then clearly we can look at altering that. Right, funding figures have been identified for me in the report, 8514, sum of 97,000 is indeed sought. So you'll see there's around about 50% of the provision, Chair.
Councillor Andrews.
Yes, thank you for that answer. So it was originally, so it's like the county were asking for nearly 100,000 for that, but it's 50. I'm just trying to work out the balance between allotment holders and young people that require relief provision. Some of these houses are fairly sizable, they'll have gardens. I can't imagine that the individuals requiring allotments is going to be quite as high as the number of families with children and young people. So I'm just wondering if we've got that balance right, 150 to 50. Seems possibly that it could be inverted, just a thought.
Thoughts on that?
I'm not going to get any carrots next year, am I?
Chairman, I don't think there's anything to add to that other than members do feel that there are different priorities they want to apply. What I would say to members as well, that depending on members' approach obviously to the proposals overall and in principle, the authorities that is sought enables further discussions to be had with Chairman and others to discuss areas such as that, areas such as the priorities. Have we got those quite right? Are there some tweaks to those that members feel could be incorporated into the scheme? So there is some latitude to look at those issues, Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. Any more on the neighbourhood centres and employment members? Councillor Burton.
Yes, we've always been told on other applications that we use the Herts County Council toolkit. When we say, why you've got this amount of money, why a little bit, it always said it's because of the toolkit. So why now are we reducing money on the toolkit for youth, equally reducing the money on burials because of the toolkit? What? I mean, I know they could enter the scale, but they're equally important. If we use the toolkit, why do all of a sudden we have less sometimes, and normally we solve it's because of the toolkit attack, even down to the costs.
Councillor Page.
Thank you. Not necessarily this section, but Mr. Steptoe introduced the topic when he said discussion could be had with the chairman and others. I'm interested in what these others are, and this also leads me to query the recommendations at the beginning of this report, which appear to delegate power to yourself, Chairman, and the Chief Planning Officer. And I think that as this is an issue which is entirely to do with Bishop Stortford, that a Bishop Stortford member should be guaranteed a place on that consultation wherever and whenever it happens.
Councillor Page, in fact, when we came to that, I have written down plus possibly 2 Bishop Stortford district councillors to be included in the consultation and the executive member, Malcolm Alexander. So I think it should be something that is looked at by several members, not just myself and the chairman of the head of planning.
Thank you.
Is there anything else on the Councillor Andrews?
Thank you. Well, following on from Councillor Page's excellent suggestion, members will see on page 1 of the supplementary, the top item, we have the basis of what you've just said, The one I read has said, if appropriate, any matter of amendment to the S106 can be referred back to the committee. I would like to make the first proposal of the evening and suggest, indeed propose, that that word can be removed. And so it reads that any matter of amendment to the S106 be referred back to the committee. Anybody prepared to second me?
Chairman, I think if the committee feel that all matters should be referred back to it, then of course I think that the requirement for that resolution goes away entirely, because of course normally there is no delegated authority to deal with the detailed Section 106 agreement. In this case, Chairman, your members will see from the page you've got and the detail in the Section 106 agreement, there is a considerable range of quite detailed matters to be dealt with in the legal agreement, simply procedurally, Chairman, so that the authority can respond in an appropriate way, in an appropriate and timely way to the discussions and negotiations that will be had. That's the purpose of seeking authority, such that planning officer team, in consultation with the chairman, as we've heard, additional people, additional members, it's simply to ensure that the council can adopt an appropriate, timely response to negotiations, Chairman. So that's the purpose for seeking a delegation there. If members do feel that all matters should be referred back to it, then of course I suggest that recommendation is removed entirely. There's no need for it, but I do urge the committee, this is a particularly detailed area of set of arrangements, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be the best use of the committee's time to look at the fine detailed agreement. I hope to the members' views on that.
Councillor Dalton.
Yes, Chairman, I would tend to agree with the officer in that as long as the Chairman and two, which is called for members, who are available to look at the 106 agreement if they should be there, I'd go along with that rather than taking every penny back to the committee. We're likely to have a meeting a week we had the other day.
It's very clearly says amendments. If there are no amendments, we don't need to. So it's only the amendments to the schedule that's there. It may well be that there are few, it may be there are many.
Well, I tend to agree with Mr Steptoe and Councillor Bolton. I think if we have to bring every single thing back, I think as long as Bishop Stortford members are included, I personally think that's most important. If there were major issues, I can understand, I think they should come back to committee. What the committee feel? Members, have you got any thoughts on that? Are you happy that it's the chairman, head of planning?
Which has been seconded, Madam Chairman.
Right. Are we going back to the recommendation?
I think, Chairman, there was a recommendation. Members may want to park that for a moment, Chairman, because it is part of one of your four recommendations. Members may want to park that and come back to that at the end, because depending on the debate and the, if you like, the more in principle decisions members may make, that may not be necessary to resolve that issue tonight, Chairman. So maybe we can just park that issue for a moment and come back to it later.
Right, anything more on the issue we've been discussing? Labour consensus, or should we go on to the next issue? Yeah?
Thank you, Chairman. The next section of the report, I think, is an important one for members to give some consideration to, is the issue of education provision. And clearly, I think some members have already touched on the issues. I want to summarise it reasonably quickly for members, but it is an area of some detail, so please indulge me if I do need to give members a little bit more detail on this. Primary schooling, if I can start there, Chairman, you will see in the report at paragraph 843 onwards that the detailed work that the County Council is the authority responsible for ensuring sufficient education capacity. The detailed work that's been undertaken to identify the need that the development generates is set out there. and you'll see that initially 843 covers the both this development proposal, ASR 1 to 4 and ASR 5. So there's a comprehensive approach been taken, and then you'll see in the next paragraph, 844, it's then pro-rated back to the ASR 1 to 4. And you'll see there in ASR 1 to 4, the need is then identified as a peak. So need is generated, it builds up, a peak is reached, and then the information we have is that the peak will fall back to what we call a longer term demand. You'll see there 844 peak 4.2 FE, wherever FE is referred to, that's a form of entry of children. Peak over 3 FE for 10 years, so it's a long peak, and over 4 FE for 4 years. And then the demand is generally held to fall back. However, and you'll see in the next paragraph, 845, County points out, HCC points out long-term average may be an underestimate. Figures are based on 2001 census data, and there are trends of rising pupil yields across the county which have not been experienced in Bishop Stortford to date, but of course may be in future. 2011 census data is not yet available for assessment in relation to this issue, but when it's released, of course, we'll enable those predictions to be updated. So that's the need that's generated. The County Council then has considered the capacity. Are there places in the town that can deal with that capacity? And the answer is effectively no. Capacity is full, it's not available. So they have sought the provision in total within the development. The developers have acknowledged that in the following, and the proposals include the following. On the western neighbourhood, there is a 1 FE primary school to be provided, land to be provided for a 1 FE primary school, and on the eastern neighbourhood, land is to be provided for a 2 FE primary school, with the flexibility that that land can be increased up to the land required to provide a 3 FE primary school. So you have there in total 4 FE. There has been discussion, Chairman, and it's referred to on your additional representation papers. There has been discussions about to what degree the land will be provided at nil cost to the County Council. And the current position, Chairman, is that land for the 1+2 provided at nil cost, then the land for the additional 1 also provided at nil cost for such time as the demand that is generated by the development requires it. So there is flexibility, Chairman, if the demand generated by the development continues to require it for a period of longer than either the 10 or the 4 years predicted. These are predictions, and they're the best information you have to go on. But if the development requires that capacity for longer than that period, it will be continued to be provided at nil cost by the developer. However, if in the future the capacity demand, the need of the development falls back from that, then there is a decision to be made, and there's a position to be reached where decisions to be made by the parties who have the authority to make the decision. Probably will still be the County Council. Does it still seek that provision to be made in that location? And if so, there is a decision to be made about the cost of the provision, the cost of the land. Chairman, there is detail to be had and set out in the legal agreement about on what basis that decision will be made, and that's the sort of detailed issues in the legal agreement that I suggest are probably not something that members may be unduly involved in, but we do need to ensure we have appropriate triggers and ways of assessing whether that demand continues to be required to be met on site. Chairman, the applicants quite rightly say that, of course, that will ensure that they are dealing with the demands generated by their development, and even though there is and may well be demand across the remainder of the town, that is not something that they should be seeking to supply. Going on from that, Chairman, sorry, it's a little bit of a detailed issue for members, but going on from that, as well as the land, of course, one needs funding to build the buildings and set out the sites. And again, members have seen, and I've quoted the figure already for you, primary education figure of £14 million, which is on the basis of each form of entry of school at £3.5 million. So that covers the 4 forms of entry. Tested some of my rudimentary arithmetic, some of these sums. So, Chairman, that primary education provision is covered. Secondary education, Chairman, a framework has been suggested to be brought forward through the legal agreement that enables land to be provided within the site if the county council feel that is the most suitable location. They're currently articulating that it is land to be provided within the site for the development of a secondary school. The county council have indicated, again, sorry, I'll turn back to those peak and long-term demand figures again. You'll see there 844 for secondary provision. The peak is 4 FE over 3 FE for 11 years. Of course, you'll see there on 843 for the whole of ASOs 1 to 5, the peak there is 4.9 or effectively 5 FE. Even though the council's policy historically has been favoured 6 FE and above schools, they have indicated that 5 FE provision is acceptable to them, and the framework would allow land to be provided that on which schooling can be delivered. A 5 FE school, secondary school, can be delivered on the site. Chairman, that is not at nil cost to the county council. The county have acknowledged that it has a role to play in provision of secondary education through the use of assets it has in the form of the land it holds at Haddon Road, and it therefore has the flexibility either to seek provision within the site or Chairman, to utilise the funding that's made available, and turning to the legal agreement sums again, £16 million. It can use the funding to deliver schooling at the Haddon Road site. So this does not close off different options. Different options are available in relation to the delivery of secondary education. As part of the proposals, again, these are options, Chairman, at the moment, and all through school may be a favoured approach, such that's where the primary and secondary provision is co-located, and there may be some sharing facilities, but I believe that is very limited, not at all. It may simply be co-location, no more than that. And Chairman, also the potential at the moment is for playing field provision as part of the development, playing field provision to be provided on the northern side of the A120, so that is outside of the A120, outside of the bypass road. Chairman, the reason for that, of course, is that schooling is very land hungry, very large sites required to deliver schools, and one needs to seek a balance again between the land to be provided for the school provision and the delivery that it will reduce in terms of housing. So that seems to be a practical solution to explore for the delivery within the side of the land to the north. Chairman, of course, as part of the County Council coming forward with its land holding at Haddon Road, there is in the report reference to, and you'll see again in the late representation papers, the county has indicated that it is willing to consider a land exchange arrangement Paragraph 8419, you'll see there the County Council's previous objection to the proposals has